Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rudy Ortiz, and I'm the chair of the Arkansas District Export Council. I also, my day job is with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. And as it turns out, my job there deals with international business and other things. And also, as I said, work as with clients on international aspects of regulatory compliance issues and revenue generation and exporting, and teaching them about exporting to try to increase their export sales. If you can have the first slide pertaining to the RDEC and AMS. Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get rid of this. So as I was indicating a little bit earlier, I'm with the Arkansas District Export Council and with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. The Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions Department within AEDC is the sponsor of this series of webinars on trade-related issues and supply chain management issues. The mission of the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions is to assist manufacturers to maximize enterprise value by assisting them with innovation, operational excellence, sustainability, and leadership development. The Arkansas District Export Council, there are 60 district export councils throughout the country, and we represent the Arkansas District Export Council, and our mission is to encourage and support the export of goods and services that will strengthen individual companies, stimulate U.S. economic growth, and create jobs, most importantly. So today we're going to be doing a webinar on doing business with India, and the moderator will be Dr. Ashvin Vivekar, who's a member of the Arkansas District Export Council, as well as the Joe T. Ford Chair of Finance at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock. Dr. Vivekar, prior to coming to be a professor at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, was serving as a managing director of the Asia Pacific for the CFA Institute residing in Hong Kong. And he's also been responsible for Asia Pacific markets and providing member services in that region. So he has a wide-ranging both experience and academic expertise in India, and he will be today's moderator. And Ashvin, if you would go ahead and introduce your two speakers, would appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Rudy. I'm assuming everybody can hear me all right. Today we have the two most prominent, I should say, well-versed individuals with tremendous experience in Indian market. Our first speaker is going to be Jonathan Goldberg. Jonathan is the international trade specialist with the U.S. Department of Commerce. And prior to that, he was a member of the South Asia office, where he joined the Department of Commerce in 2008, specializing specifically on India and Bangladesh. Jonathan is responsible for developing strategies to improve market access in foreign markets for U.S. business and ensuring compliance on bilateral, as well as special emphasis, as well as commitments that U.S. has made and other countries have made to the U.S. businesses. Jonathan's India portfolio has a special emphasis on healthcare sector, specifically biotechnology and life science. He also works on a wide variety of intellectual property issues, procurement, policy, chemicals, tariffs, processed foods and beverages, and force localization measures. Before joining the Department of Commerce, Jonathan was an associate director at the U.S.-India Business Council. Jonathan has also worked for the committees on Ways and Means and Subcommittee on Trade in the U.S. House of Representatives. He holds a master's degree in international commerce and policy from George Mason University, and has an undergraduate degree from Indiana University in Bloomington, and where he majored in political science and particularly the comparative politics, and in psychology, as well as he graduated with great honors. Jonathan would be followed by Mr. Gregory Taevs. I want to make sure everybody knows that Gregory is joining us from India. So, you know, we have significant time difference between where he is and where we are. So I want to especially thank him for joining us in the evening hours rather than relaxing out there. Mr. Taevs is a Deputy Senior Commercial Officer in the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, and Gregory heads up the day-to-day operation of 7 offices comprising the second largest commercial service country footprint in the world. So when you think about in terms of what Mr. Taevs deals with, you're looking at 1.3 billion people, and trying to serve that market is a significant chore. Mr. Taevs has a team of commercial officers and specialists. There are 6 offices in India. And before arriving in New Delhi, he served with distinction in terms of postings in Mexico City, Istanbul, Lisbon, Seoul, and twice in Tokyo and Mumbai. Mr. Taevs was an international trade specialist in the Commerce Services in U.S. Export Assistance Center in Los Angeles, California. He started with the U.S. Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, where he advised U.S. exporters on the export administration regulation, compliance, and U.S. export control policies. Mr. Taevs has a master's degree in business administration from California State University, a certificate in international business from American Graduate School of International Management, previously known as Thunderbird University, and a Bachelor's of Science degree in business from California State University. Training in export licensing and regulation from the Offices of Export Licensing, Washington, D.C., a certificate in custom laws and procedures, and the list goes on and on and on. So he has varying fluency in Japanese, Turkish, Portuguese, and Spanish. I don't know how he managed that because some of those languages are extremely difficult. Having tried learning Mandarin when I was in Hong Kong, I truly appreciate his expertise in all these languages. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Jonathan. We'll start with him, and he will then hand over to Gregory for his perspective on India. Thank you. Jonathan, it's to you.
Okay, thank you. I guess maybe you can switch. I think you have to switch control. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let's bring this up. Okay. Welcome everyone, and thanks for having me here today. I'm going to provide an overview of the U.S.-India geopolitical landscape, some demographics, as well as the Indian economy, a few market access challenges that companies often run into, and our overall bilateral engagement. Starting with the geopolitical landscape, you know, India is a democracy with the world's second largest population in the world, and the third largest economy by purchasing parity. And India really commands our attention for economic, commercial, and strategic reasons. Advancing the U.S.-India commercial relationship, of course, is a priority of the Commerce Department. Geopolitically, India has traditionally been a non-aligned country, and although it has always maintained its independence, India has, you know, really taken its position now if not just U.S. At the forefront of U.S. engagement, but also playing a larger role on the global stage. There are a number of regional and global security and trade-related concerns in Asia for the U.S. And India as well. They have particular security challenges with Pakistan and China. To manage these issues, the U.S. and India formed the what's called the 2+2 dialogue, where we're looking at regional concerns and also engaging. We're looking at regional concerns, and we've also been engaging lately through what's called the Quad, along with Japan and Australia. And it's the Quad, which is a security dialogue. It's that mechanism that we have become it's really become instrumental in helping the international community address COVID-19. On COVID, just a little bit, as of in April, India, of course, had one of the largest COVID outbreaks in the world, with the death toll of at least 400,000 people per day. COVID created really a roller coaster for economic growth in both 2020 and 2021 for the globe, and that includes India. As of November 9th, India reported 110,000 new cases, along with 2,614 deaths over the last 7 days. Still remarkably, India has over 31% of its population over the age of 18 fully vaccinated as of October 27th. And of course, that's a lot of people. They have a population of 1.3 billion. Moving ahead to some economic markers. It's often said that India is a country with unlimited potential. But India is also a study of contradictions, well demonstrated by various social indicators. There isn't just really one India to consider when trying to understand this really complex market. And as I said, India is home to 1.3 billion people, consisting of 29 states and 8 union territories. Just to kind of emphasize, I think some of these social indicators a little bit. Think of it this way. You can come to any one of India's major cities and stay in a 5-star hotel like the Taj Palace, but nearly 21.9% of the population live below the international poverty line of $1.90 per day. India is experiencing rapid urbanization. Over 34% of the Indian population live in cities. And according to one statistic, India, I mean, really, this is amazing. India needs to meet India's needs, the government basically needs to build another Chicago every year. Of course, this pressures the Indian government to create jobs and expand the Indian economy. As one would expect with the onset of the COVID pandemic, India's gross domestic product fell by nearly 25% in the second quarter of 2020. However, the Indian economy did come roaring back in the third quarter of 2020 with over 21% growth before experiencing really another drastic drop in the second quarter of 2021 with a negative growth rate of 10.2%. As of September 2021, the IMF growth projections for India is 9.5% in real GDP growth. And it looks like India may have a similar year in 2022. Let me see here. And kind of a key indicator here is also related to private savings. And private savings in India was 20% of GDP in 2020, and private household consumption was approximately 59% of GDP in 2020, as compared to China, which was 39%. As you can imagine, consumption is really a cornerstone of India's economic growth. India does have a growing middle class, and its population is quite youthful. India has a median age of 28 years old, and it's these young people who are contributing to India's consumption boom, and they are truly hungry for U.S. brands. Prior to the pandemic, young adults living at home with proportionally higher levels of disposable income than their U.S. peers. Many U.S. companies have enjoyed name brand recognition in India, and really this has reflected India's sophisticated preferences and the potential for luxury brands. We can see this because of really the explosive growth in the formal retail sector, because of strong demand outside the major cities. In fact, Indians own 84 mobile phones per 100 people, according to ITU. Over 22.3 million Indians have broadband in their homes. The significant private consumption metric really is telling, as consumption is fueling India's economic growth. Now we'll do a quick snapshot of bilateral trade. In general, 49% of their economic mix is in services, 14% in manufacturing, and 16% in agriculture. We've come a long way. In 2014, the U.S. had finally passed $100 billion in total trade with India, and in 2020, it was $120.5 billion. This is really this is significant, and our bilateral trade is really nowhere close to where it should be, given the size of our respective economies. So although there are plenty of opportunities that Greg will describe in the Indian market, we certainly need to be aware of the many market access challenges that exist in India. Prime Minister Modi was voted into office and certainly was seen as pro-business, but he's had mixed reviews regarding some of India's big bang reforms, if you will. The implementation of an integrated goods and services tax, allowing more than 50% ownership in the insurance sector and more than 50% of FDI in the direct retail e-commerce sector as well, and bankruptcy reform certainly have all been positive steps. India's growth provides really plenty of opportunities for U.S. companies, but there are some government initiatives such as Make in India to encourage companies to manufacture their products in India, and has produced significant market access barriers for our companies. High tariffs and trade barriers such as local content requirement rules and technical barriers to trade have limited U.S. exports, and that continues to be a major hurdle for us. Regulatory uncertainty, lack of predictability and transparency are also certainly part of this equation. The use of Indian-made standards rather than international standards, weak contract and IPR enforcement, inadequate infrastructure, and often confusing customs procedures also are some of the ongoing market access challenges. So I should mention here, we do have an intellectual property attaché in Delhi. There are several people on the attaché's team. They do wonderful work, and we'll make sure you all have the attaché's information. John Kubeka and his team are remarkable. So let me jump in very briefly here to some high-level bilateral engagement. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of market access challenges for U.S. companies, and it's the Commerce Department's job to work and push ahead with getting India to reform and follow global trade rules that we've all agreed to at the World Trade Organization. So we have a number of bilateral, high bilateral engagements. ITA, along with our Indian counterparts within the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, we hold the U.S.-India Commercial Dialogue and the U.S.-India CEO Forum. The U.S.-India Commercial Dialogue, we focus on business climate, standards, and travel and tourism. And ITA has also played a large role in the USTR-led, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, in other words, their trade policy forum. And our Bureau of Industry and Security continues to discuss strategic trade through the U.S.-India High Technology Cooperation Group. You know, I think to sum it up here before handing over to Greg is that I think the main takeaway here is that as you look at the opportunities in India, just be cognizant of the market access challenges as well. A former finance minister, Minister Jaitley, once said, people who urge us to undertake big bang reforms also say that that the Indian economy is a giant super tanker or an elephant. In quotes, an elephant, Madam Speaker, moves slowly but surely. And I think that's certainly true. With that, we're gonna hear more of the opportunities that exist in the market from Greg. So Greg, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan, for those great introductory remarks. And I certainly agree that, you know, India can be a challenging market. It's probably not the first place you should think of when you think about exporting, just because of the complexity, you know, of the market. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and as Jonathan mentioned, we have 7 offices in India to serve you. You can see them there around the country. These are the biggest cities and the most active commercial cities in India. I'll call your attention to the and beyond part. If you see down below, it says we have partnership posts, and it's not just India. It's the regional countries as well. We have partnerships with the American embassies in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, and we're happy to connect you with those countries as well as India. We work closely with our office in Little Rock. We have the same mission. We have a number of offices around the United States that are our eyes and ears with companies in the United States and to encourage them and to export. We have the same mission to increase jobs in the States. We have a variety of services that we use to achieve that. If you've worked with our office in Little Rock, you probably know some of these services, but we will do counseling on the appropriate strategy on how to access the market in India. We can introduce you to contacts here. Trade events, matchmaking, of course, is one of our strong points. We can advocate for your company on private sector contracts here in India, central government, municipal government, and everything in between. We do market research and due diligence. So importantly, we can vet the companies that you're dealing with, which is a real advantage here in India. And of course, as Jonathan mentioned, policy engagement and regulatory clarity, as well as helping you with intellectual property questions. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities that we see in India for American companies. And I'm going into detail on each of these. So let's kick it off with aerospace and defense. Aerospace is one of the biggest sectors here in India at $11 billion. It ranks 9th globally. There is significant growth in civil aviation. As you can imagine, India was starting from a relatively low base. People really couldn't afford to travel by air, and rail was the preferred way to get around the country. So over the years, that's changed, and because of that, airport expansion is phenomenal here. You know, in the United States, hardly any airports are being built these days. In India, dozens and dozens of airports are being built, and they're refurbishing little landing strips out in the countryside to upgrade them to be, you know, fully functional regional airports. And that's going to pull in all kinds of equipment and services, machinery, etc., from the United States. And the United States has a real edge here. So everything that would go into an airport basically is needed, and there is a market here. Let's look at defense just briefly here, because it is the #3 market for defense articles in the world. And of course, the US has a real edge here. And you can see some of the successes we've had. Now, as Jonathan mentioned, it has this history of being a non-aligned country. And the curious thing is they'll buy some equipment from Russia. They'll buy some equipment from Israel. They'll buy some equipment from the United States. So they're not putting their eggs in one basket, but still that basket is a big basket for US products. And I'll just mention that one of the interesting things about this market in India is the need for high altitude products that work at altitudes above 15,000 feet and up. And not all products do. So if you're making something for that type of environment, this is the place to be. Let me switch to infrastructure. The infrastructure market in India is the world's 3rd largest, and it's a key driver for the economy, and the Indian government realizes that, and they're putting in $1.4 trillion over the next 5 years, called the National Infrastructure Pipeline, to fund these projects. And they range from, you know, energy projects, roads, urban, railways, etc. And US companies may not come to India to build a road, but architectural, construction, engineering services, these are in big demand, and partnering with an Indian company can yield, a part of this market. We call it ICT, but it's information communications technology. And it's also an area where the United States has an edge in this market. It's a $2.6 billion market for US computer and electronic equipment exports. India has capitalized on the services sector, and business process outsourcing is one of their big offerings to the world. A lot of US companies have relocated their back offices to India. And because of that, the need for data centers, services, apps, anything that helps the back office, it may not be produced in India. They locate the services here, but it's a big market for that kind of product and service. Jonathan also mentioned that the mobile market here is huge. 720 million subscribers of wireless access. That's more than twice the number of people that are in the United States. And those are just the cell phone subscribers, basically. And of course, cybersecurity is another area where the United States has an edge with the best products and services that India really wants and they need. So if you're involved in cybersecurity, this is the place to be. I'll also mention that the digital payment processing platforms in India are quickly growing, and that creates a lot of a market for fintech that the United States also is well advanced. The Indian companies know this, and they want what we have. I'll talk just briefly about energy, and not just the fuels that India needs, but it's everything that is involved in increasing the efficiency of how energy is used in India is needed in great quantities. Things like smart meters, anything related to natural gas distribution. It's a relatively new thing in India, and it's growing like crazy. Getting piped natural gas into the cities here is a brand new thing, and anything related to that is needed. Ethanol blending is relatively new here. Anything related to that is needed. Okay, I'm going to switch to environmental technologies. As you can imagine, India needs almost everything in this regard. Everything from anything on the water chain, from processing river and rainwater to cleaning drinking water, anything related to wastewater and handling it and cleaning it and treating it, and using it wisely. So anything along that chain is needed. Solid waste, anything related to processing and handling solid and hazardous waste is needed here. And of course, what you read about in the paper is the air quality in New Delhi. Anything related to monitoring, testing, anything to analyze that and enable solutions. And the United States has a lot of this that's worked very well. Okay, I think it's a huge market, and I think US companies would do well to really pay attention to this. Healthcare. So this is another huge market, $370 billion market by next year. Public health spending is 2.5% of GDP, or soon to be. And when you look at the hospitals here, you may know that India is a big producer of pharmaceuticals and generic medicines. However, they don't make much that goes into a basic hospital. A lot of that is imported, and a lot of it comes from the United States. So this is a market, if you're doing healthcare, anything related to healthcare, you need to pay attention to this market. Okay, and the education sector, we actually consider this an export from the United States. We work with higher education entities in the United States, everything from skills training all the way up to doctoral programs. Any of the universities and colleges in the United States will know that India is the #2 source of international students in the United States. And we think that's great. Each one spends an average of $45,000 a year in the United States. And that's a healthy export. And so we'll work with the universities. All of our services that we provide to US companies are also available to US institutions. And we will have trade missions sometimes related to the education sector. We will have webinars specifically for that. And we'll also attend trade shows regarding this. We'll do matchmaking, etc. So we're interested in helping universities do
Greg,
business. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you just for a second. I failed at the very beginning to remind everyone to ask questions and to do so in the question and answer box. So if you guys have any questions out there for Jonathan and Greg, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes, thanks, Rudy. And I should have mentioned that also. We're happy to take questions. Let me conclude with a few tips for success that we see. Boots on the ground. It doesn't have to be your boots. It can be a representative or a distributor or an agent's boots on the ground. But you should have a trusted partner here in India that can knock on doors for you, that can keep you clear of some of the challenges here and find good business for you. And we can help you with those, finding the right partner. Aftermarket entry in a big city like Delhi or maybe Mumbai, we'll help you look to the other cities. You can see that we have 7 offices in India. We can look to one of those other cities to help you get started there. And after sales services is also key. India takes focus on the long term and a certain amount of patience and flexibility. And then we say that there are 4 P's to success in India: price, partners, patience, and persistence. And with that, I'll take questions, and I'm sure Jonathan would as well.
Greg, there are a couple of questions. Heidi, I am not, let me see here.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions, Rudy, so.
Yeah, could you go ahead, for whatever reason, I'm not seeing them. Could you go ahead and ask the questions, Ashvin?
Yeah, sure. Rudy, Jonathan and Greg, one of the questions is about Arkansas is big on the timber. And one of the attendees would like to know the prospects for timber market in India?
I can tell you that there is a furniture manufacturing industry in India that loves American timber. And Ashvin may know that a lot of this is located in Gujarat, which he knows well. And there are some restrictions on certain kinds of timber, but I know a fair amount of American timber is imported into India, and we'd be happy to help you connect with the Foreign Agricultural Service. That would help you out with specific contacts there.
Okay. Another question is that there's a U.S. company, they do significant amount of manufacturing, but what they would like to do is use India as a final assembly of their product. So components being, imported into India and then finally assembled and then go out into the regional market, serving the regions around that area. But local content, how would this impact their ability to do that or consider that as a possibility?
I don't know, Jonathan, do you want to take a first crack?
And which sector is this again?
The question doesn't say what the sector is.
Okay, because that part does matter for one, but in general, India is moving to push a lot of our companies to manufacture most of their product in India. So it really just depends on what you're trying to do. If you're talking about a product that would then be exported then from India. So if you're, manufacturing, I don't know, a respirator, the chips might come from India. The rest of the machine might be built in the U.S. But if you're trying to do the reverse, India, if it's for procurement purposes, they could. For procurement, you're talking about some new provisions that they have for procurement that would require, very, very high numbers of high amounts of local content. So a good percentage in order of the product in order to participate in the procurement would have to be made in India. For exporting again, that's probably very different in terms of being able to add value to a product and then re-export it. So it just depends on which sector and what scenario you're talking about.
Yeah, because
I can add a bit of general information about they have special economic zones that are usually located near the big cities or the big ports, and they are encouraging American companies to locate there and do what you're suggesting is import parts, use local labor, and then export the finished good. There are incentives offered, and there's, as Jonathan said, depending on the sector, there are incentives, production-linked incentives to manufacture certain kinds of things.
Yeah, because from reading of the question, it sounds like similar to what we have in U.S. as a foreign trade zone.
Yeah.
There's something similar there.
There is something similar here, yes.
And I would just add that, the key is that with whether it's a finished product or an input, India in general has even put fairly high tariffs on inputs, despite the Make in India program, which you would think would do everything it could to promote manufacturing in India. The Indian government has still placed fairly high tariffs on inputs as well.
You'd have to figure it out to see if it made economic sense for you. You'd have to calculate all the costs, which, yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm from the education sector, and so my question is, I recognize that Australia is the largest competitor in the education sector. They advertise more as how their immigration policies are so much better for students to go to Australia and study vis-a-vis US. What would you recommend to US entities to maneuver through the US immigration system for getting students here?
Well, I do know that here in India, they've, even during the pandemic where they've actually cut back on issuing visas, they've prioritized student visas. I saw this all through the pandemic, that this was so important for the United States that they would prioritize only the students if they had any available time. So I think that speaks well of how everyone sees this in our interest, that to get the students in. And there's a fair amount of competition worldwide. Everybody knows that, but the U.S. comes down pretty well on things like getting experience working during the schooling, things like that. Other countries don't allow it. So I think we're still very competitive in this regard.
There also seems to be a question, an additional question that just came up. What is the general price sensitivity in India for B2B? And how are American goods typically positioned or viewed? Are they viewed as premium products, mid-tier products, etc.?
They're usually seen as premium products and aspirational goods. It's a very price-sensitive market. There are a lot of low-quality, low-priced goods in India, and it's interesting that even during the tensions between India and China, the imports of Chinese goods didn't go down; they actually went up. And so, I mean, there's an appetite for very, if you're a young person in India, you want the goods, and you really can't pay a lot for things, and so you're always looking at a cost advantage, and that doesn't, shake out for the average American company that has to ship around the world and recoup their costs. So it's a difficult market in that regard. It's going to take a lot of making the market for your product and making sure that the customer knows that it's worth the cost.
Excellent.
And sometimes a company can strip off bells and whistles that are demanded in a market like Europe or Canada, or an upscale market. Sometimes you can take the same product and strip off some of the bells and whistles, and suddenly you have a product that'll sell well in India. And I've seen that before.
Perfect. There's another question here for you guys. We are a dietary supplement manufacturer looking to enter the Indian market. They're wondering, in terms of the regulations, how different they are, and also whether there are any e-commerce opportunities in terms of dietary supplements.
Yeah, maybe Jonathan knows a bit about this. Yeah.
Sure, thanks. So the health ministry does regulate dietary supplements. It's not like it is in the United States where we're not considering those to be drugs. We are looking at those as food stuff, as they call it. But in India they do regulate that industry. So when you're looking at opportunities in the market, they're looking very closely at ingredients, making sure that all of the ingredients are, how would you say, regulated. And you'd have to go through, of course, the registration process and a product approval and registration process there. So you definitely want to get started early to make sure that all your ducks are in a row. I'm certainly happy to provide additional information to anyone who needs it, but in general, there are dietary supplement companies who do business in India and are quite successful. But that said, if you have a particular ingredient where they haven't come across before and don't have a regulation for, that's when you can get some things held up.
One other question is, what is the major culture shock that a business would encounter when you go into India?
It's a market that may feel kind of familiar. I mean, it's a democracy. There are states here. It feels like there's a lot of affinity there. A lot of people speak English, but beware that it's more like Europe. You wouldn't go to Ireland and have an office there and serve everybody in Europe, because there are so many languages and so many different types of people and cultures, and they just wouldn't listen to you. So India is a bit like that. It's I think Americans might be surprised that there are the states here. It sounds very familiar, but the state lines are built around languages and ancient countries. So these were like the states were principalities, and a lot of that stayed, even though you can speak English in almost every state here. It's not their first language, and that is sometimes a shock, I think.
Yeah, one of the things that also to the point of this particular question and some of the other ones, I think you really have to understand. I tell my clients that when it comes to international business, you have to assume that it's different than what you're used to. If you start off with that premise, and which will cause you to closely investigate what the facts are, you're going to be safe that way. If you assume that it's the same as the United States, you will be 99.9% wrong. And those differences can kill your business and waste a lot of time and a lot of money. I think that the other thing that needs to be considered, besides the fact that culturally, I mean, first of all, there's lots and lots and lots of cultures, different cultures in India. It's not like the difference between California and the East Coast and the central United States. I mean, it's like major language and cultural differences that you have to take into account. India is an extremely large country, and it's not like, if you set up in Bombay, then you can cover the entire country from Bombay. It's not like that at all.
Yeah, Rudy, we got lots of questions here. Let me go ahead, and there's a particular question Rudy just talked about is, do you use a single distributor or do you need multiple distributors for India?
So it depends on, the product. So if you're in the automotive sector, we recommend you would probably go to Chennai first. If you're in aerospace, probably Delhi. So it depends on what you're, a financial services company, Mumbai. But then once you've explored that market from that single point, chances are you'll need more than one distributor.
Okay. Another question is, has COVID impacted consumption of protein?
Consumption of protein?
Yeah, so I'm assuming they're asking about the meat products.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of vegetarians in India, and I don't believe COVID impacted consumption of meat. There's not a lot of beef here, but it's a protein deficient diet, and that's noted time and again.
And by the way, on the earlier question on assembly, the individual say that it's automotive products.
Okay, so
Yeah.
So you would go where, Gregory?
Chennai.
Okay, very good. Can you go ahead and get the next question there, Ashwin?
Yeah, the question also is on in terms of the country of origin and tariff shifts implications associated with that particular question. So if you have any additional comment on that, which is if you're assembling a product in India.
Yes, there are some tariffs aimed at products made or coming in from China. There is some fear that they would flood the market and hurt local producers. So, American companies can be hurt by the same tariffs. Bringing a product in from the United States, they go, the tariff is high. It's really to keep, Chinese imports lower, but we get hit by it as well.
Okay. Another question is on supply chain, and the person wants to know how the supply chain are currently handled in India, and are there a significant problem for exporting to East Coast?
It's on the other side of the world, and there aren't as many links, I guess you'd say, or lines between the U.S. East Coast as there are to some other countries. So it usually has to make a stop to break the ship. A lot of the shipping that comes into India comes through Sri Lanka. That's what I know.
Okay.
Another question here is between China and India markets, how do you think the current geopolitical dynamic is influencing the future of these two markets? You think it will shift, and if so, will it be temporary or permanent?
Jonathan?
I would just say in general that I think companies, and Greg, feel free to say otherwise, but I think in general, companies are realizing they have to diversify where they are sourcing from. And so that means going beyond China. And certainly India, with Prime Minister Modi has said, they want to be a part of that diversification. So I think clearly India is certainly well positioned, but they don't manufacture everything and they can't be done overnight. So, if nothing else, just because they don't have the infrastructure in all cases to do that. So for example, they're not going to wake up and just start making semiconductors. So I think companies are going to shift over time here a little bit, but we'll see. I mean, China is a huge market, India is a huge market, and we'll have to see how this plays out over time. But certain sectors like the health sector are taking a very, very close look at their supply chains from active ingredients to a finished drug. And certainly even India imports a lot of active ingredients to then put in there a lot of their generic drugs for export. So, but as I said, I think they're looking to diversify. Companies are looking to diversify. Greg, do you?
No, I think that covers it.
Yeah. Ashton, do you have any more questions?
Another question on industrial hemp and the derivatives, and how about market for that? I'm not sure I know what an industrial hemp is, but that's the question.
So I think there's been some changes recently on our ability to promote hemp products. I think it's easier now. I think at some point we couldn't. It was like tobacco. We couldn't really get behind it, but now I think we can. And I think there's probably a market for it in India. I mean, I know that they produce jute in quantity here, and there may be a similar end use for it here.
Okay.
Happy to explore that.
Question on water, and on the waterfront, the question is, does India accept EPA registration, or do they require their own industrial regulatory process for water chemistry?
Yeah, I believe they require their own. Jonathan may know something about that. No?
I'd have to look into the question a little bit more on that one.
Yeah, I will tell you that, I mean, almost from country to country, most countries are going to want to at least, for you to process through their own, EPA or FDA, whatever. It's not one of these situations where, oh, it came from the FDA, we're good to go. Please don't assume that. That is just not the case. Obviously having an FDA or EPA certification, it's going to be taken a little bit more seriously, but are you going to have to go and get that approved through that country? Absolutely. We're going to have to wrap this up, but I do want to say one last thing, and that in terms of contracts. Once again, India is a very, very diverse and different country, and it's going to be very important that you have legal help, not only here in the United States, but in this case, India or whatever country that you're going into, to make sure that you have legal help there, because once again, the laws are real different, the cultures are real different, and to just kind of jump in without getting assistance from guys like Gregory and Jonathan, and also legal help both here in the United States with a law firm that has some sort of access to legal help in this case India or wherever, is just a real mistake. You'll waste a lot of time and a lot of money, and so please make sure that from a contractual perspective you get professional help, because the things are just different. Assume, no matter what country you go into, assume that it is different than the United States. And I think with that, as you guys can see, we have the emails for Jonathan and Gregory, and I am sure that if you email them with additional specific questions, they will be happy to address those for you. And so do take advantage of having contacting them and seeing what assistance they can provide. Okay. All righty, so we've gone through the questions and answers. Once again, I'm Rudy Ortiz with the Arkansas District Export Council, and if you have any questions for me, that's great as well. And there's the contact information, I think.
He's
Yeah,
making
yep,
it so.
yeah. The contact information for Greg and Jonathan and myself and Ashvin. And with that, I think, let me see, let me just go ahead and let that sit there for a minute so that you guys can write those email addresses to whomever is pertinent. We'll just leave it there for a while. Any Ashvin or Jonathan or Gregory, any last comments you want to make?
I want to just thank Greg and Jonathan for a fantastic presentation. Appreciate that. We at Arkansas District Export Council are doing everything we can to familiarize businesses with different markets, and your help is immensely appreciated.
Absolutely. This kind of expertise, you know, one of the biggest problems that companies have is they don't know who to turn to, right? Well, you can always turn to the Arkansas District Export Council, and we will put you in contact with appropriate people that have the expertise and knowledge to be able to answer whatever questions need to be answered if for whatever reason we don't know it internally. So once again, thank you so much, and I think we will call it a webinar. Have a
Thanks
great
for
day.
joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rudy.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ash.
And we will be we've recorded this, and we will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation for those who are interested in receiving it.